is you'll never have to go to school or work again because you make so much money. I'll make a little bit off you, but I'll be happy to with 10 or 15 million. So here's what we think is good mental health. We think it's 3 things. And this, by the way, I never attribute this right. This is actually the Surgeon General of the US, so it's a pretty prestigious and credible source of information about good mental health. So we think it's 3 things: productive activities. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say the productive activities have to be intellectual or physical. They have to be, they have to transform the world or make the world a better place. It's just productive activities. There was somebody in a session I was doing this morning who, before the session started, she was knitting. I couldn't see a sweater or a sock or a muffler. I don't know what she was knitting. That's a productive activity. At the weekend, when you go home and you tend to your garden or you clear the snow off the driveway, that's productive activity. Studying, productive. It doesn't mean you have to be a brain surgeon. It just means you have to do something that is productive. And we sometimes know the meaning of these words from the opposite, as distinct from doing something destructive, hurting yourself in some way, harming yourself, or engaging in behavior that puts you at high risk of damage. The second is it consists of fulfilling relationships, and one of you mentioned that. Fulfilling relationships. And again, the opposite is destructive relationships, relationships that harm us, manipulate us, abuse us, hurt us in some way or another. Fulfilling relationships is what we hope we have with the people we work with and the people we live with. People we like, people we trust, people, better still if they like us too, that's a really nice bonus as well, and nice if they love us, that's even better. But liking and respect for us, as distinct from relationships at the other time. The third is the one that also came up, I think Claire mentioned, this thing about being able to cope with adversity. And being able to cope with adversity is a real marker of good mental health. Because when we are well, and let's take my typical example, you have to drive to work, it takes 20 minutes to drive, you have a very important meeting at 9, so you leave early, you leave at 20 after 8. You go out to your car won't start. That's a bit of adversity. It's not a huge thing, depending on the importance of the meeting, but when we're well, we start to think, okay, what can we do here? I mean, first we might use some expert and say, oh shit, or we might do what one of my kids used to do when I was young and say, why does this always happen to me? Right? But we then move on and say, okay, what can we do? We think, okay, walk to work, call a cab, get a bus, get a bike, depending on the weather, depending on the distance. I have a neighbor who goes by Queens. I could call a friend and see if they pick me up. I could go back to bed. I could call and lie and say that I'm sorry, I just can't eat. Right? So we have a whole range of options. And we, depending on who we are, of course, we'll choose them. But when people become mentally unwell, they lose that ability to have that range of options. So, for example, when people become depressed, one of the things that they sometimes do is they back away from their contact with people. They tend to socialize less. So they become more socially isolated. And they do that again and again, even though they know, like we all know, that for the most part, interacting with people is good for us. Now, not always and not everybody. We may all have people in our lives, oh, I'm really happy if I don't interact with them that much. But we have people whom we interact with at work, in our classes, if we go to school, at home. And when people become depressed, they tend to back away, so they do the same thing with every social situation. When people have bulimia, for example, when they feel stressed, they want to binge and purge. Whether that stress is they're lonely, or they're anxious, or they're angry with a friend, they will engage in the same behavior. So they lose that ability to adapt and change and cope, which is really one of the hallmarks of our mental health. When we're mentally unwell, we lose that capacity. And that helps us, okay? It helps us to understand why it is that sometimes when people are mentally ill, they engage behaviors that don't seem to make much sense to us. I mean, why would somebody wash their hands so many times they break the skin on their hand? That seems strange. Well, when you think about it, it's using the same behavior to deal with a whole set of different and distressing things. So actually hand washing helps those people to feel calm. It only lasts a few minutes, but it helps them to feel calm. And so it can become very habitual. Okay, in summary, what this means is we're content, not blissfully happy, and we can deal with stresses. Now, When somebody's mentally ill, they what? Can you finish that sentence? What would it be like when they're mentally ill? Yes.
Withdraw.
They withdraw. Good. Excellent. That's one. They're more withdrawn. Yes.
They're unhappy or distressed with the standard of living.
Excellent. They're unhappy with their lives or distressed over their lives. Anything else?
Stop taking care of themselves.
Exactly. They may stop taking care of themselves. Right? So, a couple of important things here. These are all changes from the way that they were. Okay? These are changes. And we'll come back to how important that is. So, mental illness is, we think, something that affects all of the three of these, even though we have, for example, depression is a mood disorder. It affects your mood. In fact, depression and all other serious mental health problems affect all three. So, it affects a person's thinking. So what this means is that, let's say you're free on Saturday morning, so you go to Tim Hortons or Starbucks, get the newspaper, sit down and read the newspaper, and you like reading, let's say, the opinion editorial pages, right? And you find yourself into the second paragraph of an article written by some writer in the Globe and Mail, and you can't remember what the article's about. You've kind of lost track of what it's about. That's a difficulty with concentration. And that happens to people when they become ill. It also happens when they become just nervous or anxious. But really, what's the matter? If it was me, for example, reading the paper, and I come into work on Monday morning, the dean doesn't call me up and say, now, Mr. Connery, you can't actually go to work until you can tell me what's on the 5th page of the Globe and Mail on Saturday. Who cares? But if it's a student, and what they're reading is their book on microeconomics or psychology or philosophy, now you can see it's a bigger problem. Not only is it difficult to attend and concentrate because they're not remembering stuff, but you start to affect their mood because they feel anxious or afraid, right? And that's hard. So, mood changes are typically we think of feeling sad, but in fact, the two other ones, the lacking a sense of pleasure and the loss of hope, are really significant. The sense of pleasure is important because all of us need to have somewhere in our life where there's some fun. Work is sometimes fun, not always. Relationships are sometimes fun, not always. Right? But we need to have a place in our life where there's fun. So here's a simple example. Most of us in the room, I'm betting, I've never had any no's to this one, like eating food. When we're hungry, we like to eat. And we may have a preferred food. And most of us in the room can tell the difference in taste, even if we're blindfolded, between a slice of pepperoni pizza and a slab of tofu, right? We know there's a difference in taste and texture and everything. But when people become depressed, that pleasure goes away. People who are depressed don't eat, not because they want to consciously lose weight, but because they don't enjoy eating anymore. It's not interesting. It doesn't give them any sense of pleasure. And that's important because the fundamental problem is not the not eating. The fundamental problem is no sense of pleasure. The other one is the loss of hope. The loss of hope is important because I think in the lives of students, for example, it's late November, early December, they've got 3 or 4 assignments due, they're preparing for final exams. It's strenuous, it's stressful. What keeps people going? Well, part of what keeps people going is this thing of hope. It's only another few weeks and then you're over it. And when people come and talk to counselors, when students talk to counselors, for example, counselors will say that. Say, okay, we're going to just help you to hang in for the 2 more weeks that it takes, and then you're over it, and then you've got 3 weeks off. And when you come back in January, we'll work on some different strategies so that you don't feel stressed. But it's that sense of hope is really important for us. Now imagine this. Imagine you have a toothache, right? Back of your mouth, toothache, bothering you for days. So you call up and get an appointment with your dentist, an emergency appointment, and you go in and talk to your dentist, and he or she looks in, check, they do an X-ray, they prod and they poke, and then they come back and say, "Oh, gee, Mike, you've got a toothache, but it's there forever. It's gone. It's going to be there forever. So just have a toothache for the rest of your life. Sorry about that. Goodbye." Right? Now that's a different experience. There's no sense of, oh my God, because the reason we go to the dentist or if we have pain or anywhere we have pain is to get out of the pain. Who wants to be in pain? Nobody wants it. But now imagine that you're feeling like, my dentist story is purely made up, it was purely fictional, but in depression, for example, people lose that sense of hope, and it doesn't feel like anything is going to change. That's a bad place to be. The third thing is that people's behavior changes. They become more restless, or they have difficulty sleeping, or they may just not feel like they're themselves, and so they start doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. They go on long walks, or they just take to their bed, or they have difficulty getting out of bed. So behavior changes significantly. In every case, a mental health problem is associated with distress. There isn't a mental health problem that brings with it joy, pleasure, and happiness. It just doesn't happen. Many, many years ago when I worked in a hospital and people with anorexia were being seen less often than they are nowadays, somebody said, well, no, I really wouldn't mind a touch of anorexia. I really could afford to lose some weight. Well, a touch of anorexia is like a touch of depression. It's horrible. People are not happy. Right? People aren't anorexic because it makes them blissfully happy. It makes them unhappy. And the second thing is that all mental health problems affect people's functioning so that they don't function as well. They're not able to do things the way they used to do. So, I said there were 4 important simple facts. Mental health problems are more common than people think. And that means that unlike my growing up where it was 1 person in 800 with a mental health problem, we now think that it's probably 1 in 4 or 5 or 6. That means that, for example, I sometimes tell students, if you start out at the bottom of Chernoff Hall, down there at the bottom of the campus, and you kind of wander your way across the campus while the classes are changing, then you're going to bump into anywhere from 2 to 50 students with a mental health problem. The good news about that is you won't know. Even better news is students with mental health problems are able to go to university, and it's a wonderful thing. It's great. So they're more common. And there are ways in which you can demonstrate that, metaphorically, if you reach your arms out metaphorically or figuratively in your life, you're touching somebody who's got a mental health problem. Right? Second thing is, they're more disabling than people think. This is not a matter of pulling up your socks, just get with the program, you'll be okay, buck up, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Mental health problems are not like that. Mental health problems cause more lost time from work and more lost fun time in life than any physical health problem, including cancer and cardiovascular disease. Thirdly, mental health problems are associated with violence much less than people think. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when there is an incident where somebody with a significant mental health problem is violent, it attracts an enormous amount of attention, and we hear about it a lot, sometimes for days. You may remember there was an incident in a bus in Manitoba 4, 5, 6 years ago, a terribly tragic incident, and it received an enormous amount of attention, followed by all kinds of cries about, well, why are the mentally ill walking around and not being monitored, and we need more services to people who are mentally ill. But if you look at the people with mental illness as a whole and compare them in terms of violence with people who don't have mental health problems, you find that this difference between the two is always very, very small. More particularly, if you look at these people with mental health problems, and then you carve out of that group the people with both a mental health problem and a substance use problem, such as use of crack cocaine or marijuana or alcohol, cocaine, and those things. And now we have a small group with both a mental health problem and an addiction problem. That's where you find the significant increase in risk of violence. Interesting, by the way, when you look at people who don't have a mental health problem but have a substance abuse problem, you also find a significant increase in violence. So as a whole, people with mental health problems alone actually show almost no difference in level of violence than people without mental health. An interesting thing. But it attracts an enormous amount of attention. And of course, realistically and honestly, who wants to be around somebody who might be violent? So if we think that people with mental health problems are going to be violent, you wouldn't want to be around. But it's not true. Fourthly, I just want to point this out. Imagine that these 100 squares represent 1% of the violence in our society as a whole. How much violence is accounted for by people with mental health problems? Well, I estimated at about 7. That's not from exhaustive research, that's actually from a couple of quick reviews. I was at a conference recently where somebody said it was 4%, and somebody else has said 6. It doesn't really matter. What this means is that more than 90% of the violence that is committed is actually a myth about people who don't have mental health problems. That includes things. Fourthly, mental health problems are more treatable than people think. If we lived 110 years ago, we wouldn't use the word schizophrenia. Now, I'm sure all of you in the room have heard the word schizophrenia. It's a complex mental health problem. But we would use the word dementia praecox. It's two words, Latin words. Dementia of youth. Now, dementia is a disorder in which the brain loses its functioning and it doesn't get better. And so it's progressive and downhill and results in death. And that's why schizophrenia was called dementia praecox, because people thought, and there was their experience, certainly until the 1950s, that it was a disease which you contracted or got or somehow genetic, and that was it. You weren't going to get any better. We now know that the vast majority of people with mental health problems with appropriate support, community support, and treatment, like the medication, enormous changes in medication in the last 70 years, plus changes in various forms of therapy like cognitive therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, relationship therapy. All of these actually work. They really help. So 90% of people with a mental health problem will function quite adequately at whatever their pre-morbid functioning level was. Okay. Now, so I'm going to give you a 3-minute case study. One of my ongoing messages every time I talk about mental health is I want you to be able to understand the link between mental health and what you can observe in someone's behavior. Okay? I'm not going to be teaching you about how to diagnose mental health problems, but rather to be observant about people's behavior. Everyone got one? What I'd like you to do is just read through this, and then I'll give you just 2 minutes to read through. Mark off anything that you think is significant, and then let's talk about what indicators are there that Andrew may have a mental health problem. Okay. What do you see that suggests that Andrew may have a mental health problem? Yes?
His behavior has changed significantly.
So his behavior has changed significantly. One. That's good. Yes?
His trouble concentrating, evidenced by the fact that he's staring at his computer screen.
Good. So his behavior has changed, and he has trouble in concentrating. Good. That's one of the things I've talked about. Anything else?
He's more withdrawn, less cheerful.
He is more withdrawn. Yeah, good. And we talked about that as being a sign. And then he's also less cheerful. Remember what I said about sense of pleasure in life? Yes?
Flat affects, he's flat toned voice.
He's flat. He's gone from upbeat or kind of fluctuating to flat. Anything else?
Other people express concern.
Yeah, and other people are noticing things, so expressing concern about it. Yeah.
The fact that he seems to be seeking your company and can't extricate himself without articulating
Exactly.
what's going on.
This is unusual behavior in him too. So we've got a couple of unusual behaviors. We've got the stare at the screen, we've got him seeking this company and kind of there's no real content to what he's talking about, but he just wants to be there and talking. And then we have that incident where he becomes irritable and angry. Right? Angry. But notice the next line, what does that say? Exactly. He goes back the next day and he feels really badly. Okay? And this is most often the case, by the way, with people with mental health problems. They feel badly about the way they behave. They don't like it. Okay, so what you may see, significant changes, by the way, I have a little handout at the end that summarize this view. Significant changes in behavior from cheerful to despondent, for example. Noticeable deterioration in academic or work performance. Increasing emotionality, and that's the thing about him becoming angry. Emotionality means emotional control. Like I said earlier, all of us have things in our lives that make us happy or unhappy, right? And most of the time, we're able to take those things and kind of put them off to one side and say, okay, I'll just put that aside and think about it later. But when people become depressed or anxious, it becomes really difficult for them to be able to do that. And so what happens is that they start to feel out of control with their emotions. So they'll say, well, I was watching a movie with my friends and I just burst into tears. And so, of course, you ask, was it a sad movie? No, it was a happy movie. I just burst into tears. Or they may find themselves, with a friend, like say they live in a house with others, and some people have lots of different habits about washing dishes and tidying up the kitchen, and you live with it. And they've been living with it. It doesn't really bother them, but then they come in one day and there's one cereal bowl, half full on the countertop, and the person has left, so they lose their temper and, storm out, right? Out of the blue, you see that kind of emotional, the loss of the emotional control. Marked changes in personal hygiene or dress. So here we're dealing with situations where the person doesn't, not that they change the way they dress or dye their hair or cut their hair a different way or wear different clothes. It's that they lose interest in personal hygiene. Same as they losing interest in food and enjoyable activity, they lose interest in personal hygiene. And that becomes noticeable to other people, right? Other things you may see, difficulty concentrating, carrying on a conversation, acting out of character differently than usual, talking explicitly about hopelessness or suicide. Like I said earlier, many of us have things go on in our lives that make us happy or unhappy, but when it becomes talk of feeling completely hopeless, unable to change things, or suicide. Excessive dependence, and that was the thing about Andrew sticking around somebody else and talking with no going anywhere. But people often with mental health problems feel scared and frightened. Not all of them, but they feel scared and frightened. And they want to be near people and talking to them and getting their opinion sometimes because they're afraid to make a decision. Indecision becomes a problem. Feeling out of control. If there is one subjective thing I'd like you to understand about a mental health problem, it's this one. The subjective thing of feeling out of control. So most of us, for example, we have a driver's license. Most of us have driven a car. Most of us, when we drive a car, may have experienced having a skid. We hit some black ice and we weren't expecting it, the car slides. And it might last 2 seconds, it might have, I'm lucky, last 10 seconds. But you know what that feeling is like? Like you're here in this 1 metric ton car and it's sliding and you've no control, right? Now it's a lot better nowadays with anti-lock braking and so on, but nonetheless, it can be a bit scary. Imagine that your life was like that 3 hours a day. From 10 o'clock in the morning until just after lunch, you felt that scary feeling. And then it went away. And we all know that feeling. It's like you have a toothache and it goes away. Oh man, you feel great. Like you could run a mile. It's only your tooth, but you can run a mile. Well, you've been feeling anxious for 3 hours and now it's gone away. You feel terrific. It's like the weight's gone off your shoulders. So you feel good. And then at 7 o'clock at night, it comes back again for 2 more hours. And you feel really hard. Imagine what that's like. Up and down, out of control, unable to manage it. Significant changes in eating, sleeping, grooming, spending, or other activities. Significant changes in performance of these. Acting is significantly withdrawn or volatile, that's emotional. Or tearful. Greater the deviation from ordinary behavior, the more serious the illness. So most of us, including students, will experience stress. Got lots on our plate, lots of things to do, timelines, deadlines, have to get things done. We'll experience stress. But that's different from experiencing hallucinations, which are typically hearing things that aren't there. So let's talk briefly about the continuum of health. Maybe I could start by saying we all of us know that physical health is on a continuum. You have days when you feel really healthy, upbeat, positive, pretty good. And then you have days when you have a head cold and you don't feel quite so good, or maybe you're tired, maybe you didn't sleep well last night. And then you have days where it's not a head cold, like you've had this cold now for 10 days and it's a cough and you're feeling feverish, thinking, this is more than a cold. So we know the difference between a cold and the flu. We know the difference between health, cold, and flu. And we know the difference between health, cold, flu, and heart attack or meningitis. Now we're talking about a very serious health condition. So the same applies in relation to mental health. We have times when we feel healthy. We call it normal function. Normal for us, right? Normal for us. We have days when we may be reactive or reacting. What this means is that, for example, when people feel stressed, they may be a little bit irritable, or they may have a little difficulty in falling asleep, or they may be a little preoccupied and so not very available to loved ones. But it's what we call common and reversible distress. Once the pressure is off, all that stuff goes away. It's like students writing exams. They may feel very stressed and tense for a couple of weeks, but at the end, the exams are over. They're fine. They're okay again. It's not a problem, right? So it's reversible and it's expectable. I would be amazed to see a student in a counseling session in the first week in December or the third week in March who came in and I said, well, how are you feeling? Oh, I feel great. I feel so relaxed. Everything is just fine. Of course, it's not like that. They often feel at that time of the year quite stressed and uptight. We would expect it. So it's expectable distress. The next level is what we call injured. And in injured, a person may have significant functional impairment. Now we're talking about someone who's stressed a lot of the time. And now the stress is starting to do 2 or 3 things. The stress is disrupting their sleep a lot. They're having difficulty falling asleep a lot. Or the stress is harder to switch off. So, you know, that when we're stressed, if we're a pile of assignments, we can say, okay, well, worry about that later. Let's focus on the class I'm in today. But now, in this condition, injured condition, they're in class, but they can't attend because they're worried about this, they're worried about that, they're worried about the other thing, and they're feeling stressed and fatigued a lot. And maybe sleep has now become more disrupted. And then finally, you have ill. And in the ill condition, people have a full-fledged clinical disorder, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, anorexia, whatever. And we're talking about severe impairment. So it's not simply a matter of, you know, they're just a lot of sorts for a week or so. Now it's really difficult for them to function day to day. They have difficulty at work, they have difficulty in relationships, they have difficulty in some of the most basic functions in life. Not the most basic, they can dress and so on, but they may not feel like getting out of bed. They don't want to go to work. Not because they dislike work all of a sudden, but because it's too painful. We all move within these ranges. Sometimes we're in the healthy mode. We hope you're there 362 days a year. But it doesn't, not that often, that we're always in healthy mode. So we may be in this, and we may even become to this, depending on what happens in our lives. I just want to make a comment about, you know, what is it that supports our good mental health? So part of what supports us is good self-help. So if you're not sleeping well, haven't slept, it's a good idea to find out what's going on with your sleep and then practice good sleep hygiene and try to get good sleep. Or, you know, you're dealing with stress. What are your ways of dealing with stress? So maybe you go running, or maybe you do yoga, or maybe you have a hot shower, maybe you listen to music, maybe you have a beer, whatever. Do you have coping mechanisms to deal with the stresses? Self-help. Occasionally, we need social support. We need someone to talk to. Maybe something painful has happened and it would help to talk to someone. Maybe you have a big decision to make about a job or a move or a relationship and you want someone to talk to. Social support. Having people to talk to. And for a lot of the time, that's fine. Occasionally, we need professional help. Right? It's like the cold versus the influenza and meningitis. Sometimes when people get influenza, they need professional help. So what is the dividing? Well, when people are typically in the healthy mode, self-help and social support will keep us mentally healthy. As long as you practice good self-care and you've got a good social support network, you can talk to people who respect you and care about you, you can maintain pretty good mental health. You can see that up here at the top is not perfect. Sometimes we do need a little bit of professional care, like preventive care, for example. We need to go for examinations to our physician to make sure we're not developing any health problems. Over here, when we look at the ill side, you can see that most of that is going to need professional care. Okay? When people develop significant depression, schizophrenia, OCD, PTSD, whatever disorder, they need to be seen a professional, because that's the kind of problem that is unlikely to go away by itself, and if left untreated becomes a lot worse. You can also see over here, however, that there is still a little bit of room for self-help and particularly for social support. People who have mental health problems, and this has been demonstrated, who move from a mental health treatment facility into a supportive environment like a loving, caring family, for example, do a lot better, are much less likely to be readmitted to hospital than people who are discharged from hospitals and go into a boarding house. That's a big difference. So there is always room for that social support and self-care. Okay, so 3 things you can do to help, and I'm going to move through these and try and get us done. I'll be probably about 3 minutes late, but hopefully bear with 3 minutes. 3 things you can do. I decided to count them into 3. Very simple things. And they will help other people, and they will also help you, make you feel better too. The first is, listen to first-person stories. Listen to what people say about their experience with mental health problems. I'm going to show you a video about 90 seconds, 2 minutes long. And I like this because it really talks about people's experience with mental health problems. Bear with me while I get this thing running. Now, just a quick comment. This is a very short video. It's about a dozen, 15 people saying some very brief things about their experience with mental health problems. And one of the reasons why I like it is, in parts, as you will see, in parts it's actually quite funny. Very happily funny. Bear with me.
Somebody knows me first as Liz, and then I might say I'm a doctor, and then I'll say, oh, and I've had some mental health problems.
Paranoid schizophrenia,
Anorexia.
Borderline personality disorder,
Self-harming.
Schizoaffective disorder,
clinical depression.
It's not a good line. Hi, I'm Lizzie, I'm manic depressive.
Nutter.
Spiking.
weirdo.
Mad.
If I break my leg, you can see that it's in a cast. If I'm suffering from depression, you can't see that.
Do you know why it's called cracking up? Because you feel like you're cracking. Your head is cracking into millions of bits.
I've been sectioned around about 10 or 11 times now, although I'm pacing around, I'm not going for any kind of record.
I get a lot of swearing in my head. I wake up every morning to stupid ending bit.
I went to GP with a written on a piece of paper in the third person. Dawn had to be shouting down for the weekend and slid it across the table. That was a eureka moment, because then I knew what was going on. I knew what monster I was dealing with.
People often feel that it's self-indulgent. Those are people who haven't had depression.
Once it was in a newspaper, and I was so appalled, I grabbed it out of everybody's hand and said, they're making that up.
A person's mental health symptoms are not the person.
Person likes me for who they think I am, but what would happen if they knew who I really was?
People come up to me, they waving a finger at me, you're a bomb.
I would tell people I was gay. Right, that was easier. I've had eggs thrown at my door.
For about 2 years, really, every time I went out back to the door, I get over further physical abuse.
Someone said that my mum was a psychopath.
Getting some sort of credit for beating the psycho up.
One of the questions was, would you be happy living next door to someone with a history of mental health problems? And one woman turned to me and went, I really wouldn't, but only because I've got children. And I said to her, why? Why would that make any difference? I'm pretty sure we don't eat babies.
We need to dispel this myth that we're all crazy mad axe murderers. The only person I've ever harmed is myself.
It's an awful feeling. It's like nobody likes you or loves you.
Nobody really wanted to touch me with a barge pole as soon as they heard I had a mental illness.
Some people think that John's mad and that he's going to, attack them or attack their children, so they keep the children away from my children.
Mental illness. I mean, what? I mean, would we live without children?
Abraham Lincoln.
Marie Curie. Charles Darwin.
Florence Nightingale.
He was just my brother, and he
he wasn't ironically schizophrenic. It came as a real shock to me when he took his own life.
You go to the hospital expecting to see somebody else's son.
Suicide is the biggest killer of young men under 40 in this country.
It's the end of your world. It's like someone's taking a piece of you away. You don't ever expect to outlive your children.
The Butterfly Project, funded by Comic Relief, has meant so much to me because without them I wouldn't even be here.
The local projects supported by Comic Relief are absolutely vital. They provide a social lifeline to people who are very vulnerable and frequently extremely isolated.
Comic Relief really has, through the project that I'm working on, turned my life around.
I'm much more communicative now because of my depression. I'm more appreciative of simple things, so when it's a sunny day or when you're driving along and there's a field full of flowers.
I think it's made me a nicer person.
Much more tolerant. I'm not scared of being bipolar. I'm not scared of it anymore.
As far as I know, the normal life to be, I would live in normal life.
It's actually not a bad place to be seen.
Don't shun us. You know, we are just like everybody else.
Okay, like that? Good. I like the humor. The man said he was sectioned 10 times, that means he was committed to hospital 10 times. Then he says, of course I'm not really trying to set a record. Okay, so please. So there are things you can do. I just want to describe them to you very briefly. Second set of things you can do. You can talk to people. And we put this under approach, listen, support, and refer. You can listen. Listen attentively, listen non-judgmentally. Little story. Professor calls me up. Would you come to our department, please? We need to know how to deal with students in crisis. I said, fine. I said, can you give me an example of what happened? He said, I had a student come in writing an exam at 1:30, my exam in my course, 10 to 1, and she was in distress and shivering and shaky, and she was pretty sure she couldn't write the exam, and it was terrible, so I told her, come in, sit down, relax, you know, got her a glass of water, she cried, and I got a long story short, 20 past 1, she's much calmer. She says, I think I can write the exam. So he said to me, you know, I just didn't know what I should be doing. Tell me, you know, what I should be doing. How should I be helping her? I said, well, let's go through a checklist. Did you A, run screaming from the room? No. Did you B, turn on your television and have a look at the program? No. Did you check your email? No. Did you look at your watch? No. Did you say to her, gosh, you think you have problems, wait till you have what I have to deal with? No. I said, then you did a brilliant job. When you sit compassionately with somebody who has the courage to tell you how distressed they are, you're doing a great job. Wonderful job. Thirdly, give them support, reassurance, and comfort. Let them know that you care, let them know that you want to help. And then finally, refer. And we tell people, we're not trying to teach you, train you to be counselors. We're training you to feel comfortable in doing the things that you probably already do with other people in your life. You got a friend at work or somebody you work with that you feel okay to walk up to and say, hey, you know, John, you're everything okay? You look a bit preoccupied. That's all we're doing here. So, I might say the wrong thing. People get very worried about that. I might say the wrong thing. You know? The person has pneumonia, you might say the wrong thing to them and make the pneumonia worse. But of course, you say the wrong thing. Try this. Here's some scenarios. You can tell me what it is right now. Hey, Alex, you look down. Do you have depression? Okay? I just highlighted the things in blue that are not so great, right? Why? Because Alex is probably going to say, oh my God, Mike, thank you so much. I never realized what this was. You know, now I'm glad you've told me. Right? Of course not. Keep your attention on the things you can see. I notice you're very quiet. You can see that. Is everything okay? So you state what the person's showing you in their behavior, and then you ask them, are you okay? And haven't seen you at parties. That could be social phobia. Right? Very unhelpful. And I put that in the part of humor. It's a social phobia, but like, don't be naming disorders because we don't know. A student at a barbecue is not eating. Is it anorexia? Well, could be anorexia. Could be they're not hungry. Could be they have a sick stomach. Could be a religious observance. Could be they don't like the smell of smoke. Could be, who knows? We don't know, but we can observe the behavior. I see you're not eating. Are you feeling okay? I notice you haven't eaten much. You could have anorexia. So, you know, the sorts are things okay. Keep your focus on the behavior. This is that one I like. You can say much today, maybe pull up your socks. It's a really helpful, enthusiastic, compassionate thing to say. So, these are some bubbles. You'll find some more information in this brochure. I'm happy to send you more stuff as well afterwards. Things you might say. It's okay to broach the subject. I'll tell you some rules in a moment for why. It's okay. That's not why, how. Listening bubbles are really hard to do because listening bubbles should really be empty. That's when you're listening. But in fact, listening in part involves letting people know that you are listening. Right? Support them. Just simply positive statements. Let them know that there are resources and you will help them to find them. Support people. I've told many students, I'm sure my psychology license should get revoked. I told people at the end of the session, so, you know, you might not believe this today, but you will feel better. And I had people say to me that it really helped that they just thought that didn't feel better, but it just helped to say, okay, somebody who knows something about what I'm going through thinks I'll feel better. It's good. We forget that. It's not because I'm a brilliant genius or I know a lot more than other people. It's just sometimes we need to take that step out. I told this to a professor recently. I said, when you write to the student who is so despondent, say, I'm glad that you wrote to me and I know it can be better. Isn't that helpful? You'd be amazed. Because sometimes people get demoralized because they're the only student in Queens who's depressed. Or the only student in Queens who can't function. It doesn't happen. Like there are lots of people. 10% of the student population use the counseling service every year. Okay, so refer. Just we want to encourage you to know there are resources on campus, and I can't really tell you about the resources. The resources are available. Please encourage people to use them. We get to see them as quickly as we can. So these are the tips, general rules, and this is my big one. I'm thinking I'm going to copyright that statement. Say what you see. Focus your attention on things you can actually see. Don't worry about what's underlying. What's underlying is something they probably won't want to disclose to you in the first sentence. Because, for example, imagine you're in Kingston, you're waiting for a bus, you're standing at the bus shelter by yourself, somebody else joins you, and the first thing they say to you is they give you a litany of their illnesses. Well, I have terrible problems with diabetes, and, you know, I blah, blah. You would find that very strange, and most of us would. So we're not expecting people to disclose every detail of what's going on, only that you are there pointing out the behavior you can see. Be patient, that is, be patient with the other person. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to talk about what pains us, especially to friends, colleagues, etc. Because we don't want, none of us wants to appear weak. Not that, again, we have to be stiff upper lip all the time, but all of us have a vested interest in feeling strong and in showing other people that we are. Right? Be patient. Trust yourself. If you see something with a friend or colleague that you think is not right, then trust yourself. You don't have to force them. Don't engage in a power struggle. Keep the door open for them to come back and talk to you. If they don't want to talk today, it's okay. Know that you can come back and talk to me anytime you want. Right? And then be prepared to have your advice ignored politely. I put this in because I think it's part of all of our day-to-day lives. I have 3 magnificent children. They're really great. They're lovely. My baby is 32, so it's pretty old now. I've given them lots of advice, some of which they ignore. Of course, on the other hand, I myself have also been given lots of advice, some of which I've ignored. So I eat sometimes a pretty steady diet of humble pie. Right? It's good for us. When someone is in distress, there are things you can do that are really helpful. So calm presence. Right? Someone is frightened or scared. Sit them down. Give them your full attention. Maintain a calm presence. Use a soothing voice. Provide them with reassurance and support. I talked about that. Use short, repeated statements. Because when people are scared or frightened or in a panic or in distress, they often don't get the information the first time you give it. I was in the hospital once watching somebody talk to a member of a family who's just, a loved one had just died, and he said to her, you know, don't worry about this now. This is a process of grieving. First you'll be in denial, and then after that you'll probably go through a period where you'll feel angry at the world, and you'll start to feel sad, but eventually it will resolve itself. Blew right over her head. Why not? In your state of shock, you're not processing the information. So short sentences, you'll be okay. Have a seat. Let's talk. Shorten and repeat them. It's okay. People will not get the information necessarily the first time. And then refer. Keep on mentioning that there are resources on campus. So, the third thing you can do, very simple thing, all of us can avoid using demeaning language. All these ones on the left here, it's crazy, insane, don't be bonkers, right up. We can avoid using them. And most people have to say do. Not everyone, but most people do. So avoid them. They're better words, better phrases. This is my favorite phrase of all, because I think at some point we're going to arrive at a stage where we'll say, it's a health problem. It doesn't really matter if it's physical or mental, because the two are tied up anyway. Let me give you a small example. You ever had an ache or pain that wouldn't go away for days? You know how people is that for your mental health? Pretty horrible. I had norovirus. I don't know if any of you have ever had norovirus. It's a gastrointestinal thing. Let me tell you, in the middle of that, the phrase that came to my mind, the living within me that day, it's terrible. I feel horrible. Horrible. So the two are tied up. It's really about our health. That's really what it is. Okay, you're concerned? Pause. That means saying this to, well, anybody, staff or students. You have a student in your office, students come see you, you're distressed, you're concerned about a friend, pause. Red flags, student mentions suicide, or the behavior seems out of sorts. If it's during the day, call the counseling service and ask to speak to a counselor. It'll help. And then the last one is, if somebody's explicitly mentioning a plan or a wish to hurt somebody else, or if it's any situation that seems like it's getting out of control, or if it's any problem situation that's outside of the regular business hours, it's called the Emergency Report Center of Campus Security. I've kept you a little bit late, but any questions? Okay. Would you mind if I took 2 minutes of your time to just simply evaluate this, please?
Case studies.
Good. Oh. Sorry, what's not evaluations?
Students to